Stupid black mouth. That's how Donald Trump spat on Jasmine Crockett, hoping to silence her, hoping America would laugh with him. But in August 2025, as the 45th president flaunted the scar on his ear like a crown, Crockett opened a file that could shatter everything. The so-called miracle bullet? No match found. The blood America saw on live TV? Laboratory analysis showed synthetic clotting agents, fake blood. Trump's approval jumped 28% in just 4 days after that staged spectacle. Billions of dollars in campaign donations poured in. And millions believed the myth of the man who survived an assassin's bullet. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't buying it. She wasn't afraid to say, what if the bullet never existed? And when she said it, the walls of Congress shook. The doors swung open. Donald Trump strode in, head high, every step measured, every glance calculated. He wasn't just entering a chamber, he was entering his stage. Applause thundered from his loyalists. Some leapt to their feet, clapping as if he had single-handedly conquered death itself. And in a way, that was the image he sold them. Trump turned, just enough so the cameras caught the scar on his ear. A thin line of flesh, but to his supporters, it was a divine signature. Proof that fate had spared him. Proof that he was chosen. He paused, stretched his smile wider, and let his words boom across the marble hall. I am the living proof of America's immortality. The words hit like cannon fire. Gasps, cheers, fists slammed against desks. The chamber quaked with noise. For a moment, it seemed he had won the day before it even began. The miracle man, the untouchable, the president who had stared down a bullet and survived. But then, a sharp scrape cut through the frenzy, a chair sliding back. Jasmine Crockett rose. No applause greeted her, no fanfare, just silence thick enough to smother. Her eyes locked on Trump. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't need it. Her voice cracked through the chamber like a bolt of thunder. No, Mr. President, you are nothing but the director of a blood-soaked hoax. The words split the air. Cameras whipped toward her. Journalists fumbled for pens. Senators twisted in their seats, mouths falling open. And Trump, Donald Trump, the man who mocked her as stupid black mouth, went pale. The mask slipped. For the briefest second, his jaw tightened, his eyes darted, his scar seemed smaller, almost painted. The silence shattered. Gasps turned into roars. Some screamed, outrageous! Others shouted, let her speak! The speaker's gavel hammered down, but the sound drowned in chaos. Jasmine did not move. She did not blink. Her voice rose again, iron against fire. This scar is no miracle. It is theater, a lie stitched into flesh, paraded as truth. And today, this nation deserves better. The chamber erupted once more, louder, harsher, as if the building itself could not contain the storm. Millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens. Every camera lens tightened on Trump's face, on the crack in his armor, on the sweat beating at his temple. The legend of the bullet was no longer untouchable, it was trembling. And Jasmine Crockett, standing tall in the eye of the storm, had just lit the fuse. But a fuse is only the beginning. The explosion comes when truth is revealed. She reached into the slim leather folder clutched against her chest. Her fingers moved with precision, not haste, as if she knew the weight of what she carried could topple empires. When she pulled the photograph free, the chamber hushed without being told. Even Trump's most devoted allies fell silent, curiosity gnawing at their bravado. The image was projected onto the massive screens flanking the chamber. Gasps rippled instantly. It was the crime scene, frozen in time, magnified for the nation to see. The ear of Donald J. Trump smeared in crimson. The photo every newspaper had once splashed across its front page as proof of his survival. But enlarged under harsh light, the details betrayed him. The blood was too thick, too glossy, too uniform. It clung unnaturally to the curve of his ear, pooling with a strange sheen that reflected light almost like varnish. Jasmine's voice cut through the stunned silence, calm but searing. This is not human blood. This is synthetic clotting agent, used in stagecraft, in film, in medical simulation. Not in survival. The chamber erupted in whispers, low at first, then louder, then swelling into a cacophony. Senators leaned toward one another, hands covering their mouths. Reporters hammered keyboards, their screens glowing like fireflies in the dark. Across America, living rooms fell silent. Millions stared at their televisions, squinting, blinking, trying to reconcile what they had once believed with what they now saw. A mother in Ohio whispered to her husband, "It looks fake." A veteran in Texas muttered at his screen, "That's not blood. I know blood." A retired nurse in Florida shook her head, tears forming. "He lied to us. He lied to all of us." Trump's face turned crimson. He pounded the podium with his fist, his voice rising in desperation. "Lies, disgusting lies. This is Photoshop, a smear campaign, another witch hunt." But the photo glared down on him, indifferent to his rage. It did not flinch. It did not blink. And Jasmine, she did not move. Her eyes locked on him with the steadiness of a surgeon about to cut open a wound. "If this chamber doubts me," she said, her voice now louder, bolder, riding over the roar, "then let the labs speak. Independent forensic testing confirms. No hemoglobin, no cellular structure. This is not blood. It is chemistry. It is theater." The whispers stopped. The silence this time was different. Not the pause of shock, but the stillness of realization. Trump's allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some glanced down, refusing to meet the camera's gaze. Others stared at him with quiet horror, as though they had just realized the stage they cheered on was built on rotten wood. Trump tried to laugh. It came out as a hollow bark. "You think America will believe her?" He sneered, his voice trembling beneath the forced grin. "You think this pathetic charade can erase my survival? They saw me bleed. They saw me live." But Jasmine was ready. She gestured to the screen again, zooming in on the photo until every pixel screamed the truth. The blood didn't soak into the skin. It beaded on the surface, slick, perfect, untouched by the chaos of real trauma. "They saw what you wanted them to see," she fired back, "and now they see the lie." The chamber gasped as one. Social media ignited like a wildfire. During fake blood, Yishun, bullet hoax, Yishun, Crockett vs. Trump, all trended within minutes. Clips of Jasmine's calm accusation replayed millions of times, side by side with the damning photo. News anchors broke into live coverage with disbelief painted across their faces. "If what Representative Crockett says is true," one muttered on CNN, "then the greatest miracle of Donald Trump's presidency may not have been a miracle at all, but a stage-managed deception." Trump's hands trembled on the podium now. His eyes darted from the photo to the faces of his own party. He searched desperately for a defender, a loyalist to rise, to shout, to save him. None came. The scar on his ear seemed smaller under the glaring lights. Less heroic, less divine. For the first time since that fateful day, the myth was cracking in real time, on live television, in front of millions. And Jasmine Crockett, standing firm at the center of the storm, twisted the knife deeper. "Mr. President, you claim to be chosen by God. But this?" She raised the photo higher, her voice ablaze. "This was chosen by a makeup artist." The chamber exploded. Gasps, shouts. Some laughed in disbelief. Others cried out in rage. But across the nation, in living rooms, bars, nursing homes, and quiet kitchens, one truth sank in like lead. The blood was fake. The bullet was a lie. And the man who had sold himself as America's immortal survivor was trembling before the eyes of the world. But Jasmine Crockett was not finished. The truth she carried had more voices than her own. The chamber's side door opened with a groan. A guard escorted in a man in chains. His face was pale, gaunt, unshaven, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. The nation recognized him instantly. The so-called gunman, the man arrested on that day. The failed assassin who had fired the bullet that supposedly kissed the president's ear. For months, he had been painted as a fanatic, a lone wolf, a shadow lurking in the margins of democracy. Now he was here, under oath, trembling beneath the blinding lights of Congress. The room fell silent. You could hear the scrape of a pen, the click of a camera. The nation held its breath. Jasmine turned toward him, her voice calm, almost gentle. "State your name for the record." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like it might choke him. His voice cracked. "David Harlan." Gasps. The name splashed across headlines for a year, now spoken like a ghost reborn. Jasmine leaned forward, her tone steady, surgical. "Mr. Harlan, who gave you the weapon that day?" A pause, his lips quivered. He glanced at the cameras, then at the faces in the chamber. Sweat trickled down his neck. "It was—" He hesitated. The chamber leaned in. Millions at home leaned in. Then his eyes shifted, slowly, deliberately, across the room. They locked on Donald J. Trump. The silence was electric, charged, dangerous. A silence so sharp it could slice through steel. It was— And then, the microphone cut. Dead silence. Not from the man, but from the machine. His lips moved, his face contorted in desperation, but no sound reached the chamber. No sound reached the airwaves. The cameras flickered. The live feed stuttered, then froze. For a fraction of a second, millions of Americans stared at blank screens. The testimony snatched away mid-breath. Gasps erupted in the chamber. Reporters shouted. Lawmakers leapt to their feet, demanding answers. "Turn it back on! Who cut the feed?" The speaker's gavel hammered desperately, but the panic was already spreading like fire. David Harlan thrashed, his voice muffled behind silence. His eyes were wild, his chest heaved, but the world heard nothing. He pointed again, straight at Trump. His lips formed the words over and over. It was him, it was him. But the sound was gone. The nation had been gagged in real time. And in that suspended moment, the cameras caught Trump's face. His smirk, not triumphant, smug, knowing. The kind of smile a man wears when the system bends to protect him. It was a smile that sent shivers through the millions watching. Then Jasmine moved. She rose calm amid chaos, her eyes fixed like daggers on Trump. Her voice, clear, unshaken, unmuted, rolled across the chamber. "Your fear is showing, Mr. President." Gasps again. All eyes turned. Trump stiffened, the smile faltering, his fist tightening on the podium. Jasmine's words carried the weight of thunder. "If this man's truth threatens you so much that his very voice is silenced, then America should ask why. What are you afraid of? Why cut the feed unless the gun was never his to begin with?" The chamber broke into chaos once more. Shouts, cries, demands for order. The speaker shouted, red-faced, but the gavel was powerless. The truth had slipped out, even in silence. Because silence speaks louder than words when the whole world sees the muzzle pressed against the truth. Across America, outrage erupted. In New York, crowds gathered outside Times Square as the live feed flickered back, chanting Jasmine's name. In Texas, veterans watching at a VFW hall cursed, slamming their fists into tables, demanding answers. In California, students flooded the streets holding signs, "Unmute the truth." Social media caught fire again. McCut, not only who silenced him, or Trump fear all stormed to the top of trending charts. David Harlan slumped in his chair, his body sagging under the weight of a stolen voice. Tears streaked down his face. Jasmine turned toward him, her eyes soft for a moment, then sharp again as she addressed the chamber. Even in silence, his truth has spoken. Even without sound, his finger pointed where it needed to point. Her hand rose, slow, deliberate, and extended, directly toward Trump. And we all saw it. The room shook. Trump barked, shouting over the noise. "Lies, all lies. He's a criminal, a lunatic, a nobody." But his voice cracked under pressure. His rage sounded less like authority and more like panic. The cameras didn't love him anymore. They didn't linger on his scar, his bluster. They lingered on his sweat, on his trembling hand gripping the podium, on the unease spreading across the faces of his own allies. And in that chaos, Jasmine Crockett stood taller than ever, unshaken, unmoved, her smile faint but sharp as glass. She had turned silence itself into a weapon, and in that silence, America heard the loudest truth of all. But silence was not enough. Jasmine Crockett knew that silence alone could be spun, twisted, dismissed as paranoia. What she needed now was steel, science, proof no man could shout down, and she had it. From the folder at her desk, she withdrew a second document. This time not a photograph, not an image to be doubted, but a report. Cold, clinical, forensic. Mr. Speaker, members of Congress, she said, her voice measured but edged with fire. I submit into the record the independent ballistic analysis of the so-called assassin's bullet. She held it high. The cameras zoomed in. Reporters strained forward. The pages gleamed under the lights, stamped and signed by federal examiners, their authority undeniable. The chamber quieted to a deathly hush. On the giant screens, the report appeared in bold letters. Exhibit 27A. Ballistic forensic findings line by line. The conclusion was laid bare. The round presented as evidence in the attempted assassination of President Donald J. Trump does not match any weapon recovered at the scene. No casing recovered. No ballistic trajectory consistent with wound pattern. Conclusion: the bullet entered into evidence does not exist in the chain of custody. The chamber gasped as one. Trump gripped the podium, knuckles white, sweat streaking down his temple. That's fake! More fake news! He roared, but his voice cracked like thin glass. Jasmine didn't even glance his way. She pointed instead to the words glowing on the screen behind her. No bullet, she repeated, her voice steady, deliberate, echoing off marble walls. The evidence is clear. No match, no casing, no trajectory, no chain of custody, which means... She let the pause hang like a blade in the air. The silence was suffocating. Then she cut it. There was no bullet that grazed his ear. The chamber erupted. Shouts, cries. Reporters sprinted toward phones. The public gallery gasped loud enough to echo. The only thing that flew that day, Jasmine pressed on, her voice rising above the chaos, was a lie. A lie dressed in stage blood. A lie sold to this nation as a miracle. Across America, jaws dropped. In living rooms, war veterans sat stunned, replaying their own memories of battlefield wounds, comparing them to the neat little scar Trump flaunted. In hospitals, nurses and doctors shook their heads, muttering, "Impossible. It doesn't add up." On social media, the phrase "no bullet" exploded, trending in minutes, hashtags multiplying like sparks in dry grass. One no bullet, me yummer bullet hoax, knee, lies and scar. Trump slammed the podium again, desperate, wild-eyed. I bled. I almost died. Millions saw it, he bellowed. But Jasmine's voice was sharper, cutting through his denial like a scalpel. Millions saw what you staged. Millions saw what you wanted them to see. But the science does not lie. She raised the report higher, her silhouette burning against the giant screen like the embodiment of truth itself. No bullet, no miracle. Just a president so desperate to be worshipped, he forged his own martyrdom. The chamber shook. One senator clutched his chest, whispering to a colleague, "If this is true, everything changes." Another muttered, "It was all a con. God help us." Even Trump's staunchest allies sat rigid, their faces pale, unwilling to meet the cameras. Because science was merciless. You could argue politics, you could dismiss photographs, you could discredit witnesses, but you could not conjure a bullet that never existed. Trump tried again, his voice breaking. "This is a witch hunt. They're trying to erase my sacrifice." But his words no longer filled the chamber. They fell flat, swallowed by the rising tide of realization spreading across the room. Jasmine's eyes locked on him, unwavering, cold, resolute. "You cannot erase what was never real," she said. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters typed with feverish urgency, sending shockwaves into the bloodstream of the nation. The myth was disintegrating live, frame by frame, broadcast into every home. And for the first time, America began to see their immortal survivor for what he was. Not a chosen man of destiny, not a victim spared by divine grace, but a fraud trembling beneath the weight of his own invention. In that moment, Trump's scar ceased to be a crown. It became a brand, a mark not of survival, but of deceit. And Jasmine Crockett, with nothing but evidence and conviction, had turned the bullet that never was into a weapon sharper than any round of lead. The chamber thundered with uproar. The nation thundered with disbelief. And Trump, red-faced, trembling, eyes darting like prey, cornered, looked less like a president and more like a man exposed. Then his rage broke loose. He slammed his palm down against the podium so hard the wood groaned. The crack of flesh on oak cut through the clamor like a gunshot. "This is a witch hunt," he roared, spittle flying, his voice strained and ragged. "This Congress, this disgraceful Congress, is conspiring against your sitting president." His face contorted, twisted with fury. He jabbed a finger outward, stabbing the air as if he could impale his enemies with gesture alone. "You are not questioning me," he bellowed, his voice shaking. "You are questioning America itself. You are questioning survival, faith, destiny." The chamber erupted again, some loyalists leaping to their feet in applause, others shouting back in outrage, the gavel pounding uselessly against the storm. But Trump wasn't finished. His rage fed on itself, rising higher, more unhinged. "Enough of this charade!" he screamed, pointing directly at Jasmine Crockett. His hands shook, but his voice cut like a blade dipped in venom. "Arrest her! Arrest that liar now!" Gas ripped through the room. Reporters froze mid-scribble. Senators shifted in disbelief. Cameras zoomed, capturing every twitch of his trembling hand. Trump's command echoed through the chamber. "I am the President of the United States, and I order this woman detained." Security guards at the back stiffened, caught between the command of their commander-in-chief and the sanctity of Congress. Their hands hovered near their belts, eyes darting nervously from Trump to Jasmine to the speaker's chair. The air turned suffocating. A single step forward could ignite chaos. But Jasmine did not move. She stood tall, unflinching, the storm swirling around her while she remained the still point at its center. Her eyes never left Trump. Her voice, calm but edged with steel, rang out above the madness. "I do not fight for thrones, Mr. President. I fight for America." The words hung heavy, like a verdict delivered by history itself. The chamber fell still for a heartbeat, stunned into silence. Even the gavel paused mid-strike. Trump's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His fury collided with her conviction, and for a moment he was mute. Then the chamber roared again. "Let her speak," shouted one side. "She's a traitor," screamed the other. The speaker's voice cracked as he demanded order, but his gavel was drowned in the chaos. Through it all, Jasmine stood steady, her chin lifted, her eyes sharp as glass. She raised her hand, not in defiance but in command of truth. "You can order my arrest," she declared, her words slicing through the uproar. "But you cannot arrest the evidence. You cannot handcuff the facts. You cannot silence a nation that sees through your lies." Every syllable hit like hammer blows. Trump's face twisted into a mask of rage. He shouted over her, his voice breaking, "I am your president. I bled for this country. I gave my body for you." But his words no longer soared. They stumbled, jagged, and desperate. Because America had already seen the fake blood. Because America had already seen the vanishing bullet. Because America had already seen him tremble. On the screens above, Jasmine's words replayed in captions. "I fight for America, not for your throne." They spread like wildfire across the nation, already climbing the walls of social media, already etched into the memory of millions. Trump tried to shout them down, but his fury only amplified her calm. His red face, his shaking fists, his cracking voice, all of it stood in contrast to her poise. One looked like power unraveling. The other looked like justice rising. In living rooms across the country, people sat glued to their televisions. A veteran in Pennsylvania muttered, "She's got more courage than the whole damn chamber." A grandmother in Alabama whispered, "He wants her arrested because he's scared." A factory worker in Michigan slammed his beer on the table. "She's not backing down. Finally, someone's not backing down." The tide was shifting. Trump pounded the podium again, his voice breaking into hoarse growls. "This is treason. She is destroying America from within." But Jasmine's reply was merciless, delivered with the calm precision of a blade. "No, Mr. President, the only one destroying America is the man who tried to fool it with stage blood and a phantom bullet." The chamber erupted once more, but this time the noise wasn't chaos. It was revelation. A truth had been spoken that could not be unsaid. Trump sagged against the podium, his breath ragged, sweat dripping down his temples. His eyes darted, searching desperately for an ally to rise, for someone, anyone to defend him. But no one moved. His fury had exposed him. His desperation had betrayed him. And Jasmine Crockett, still standing, still unshaken, looked less like a congresswoman and more like the voice of the nation itself. She had stared down the fury of a president, and with nothing but truth, she had silenced it. But Jasmine knew truth had many faces, some too frightened to speak, some waiting for the right moment. Now that moment had come. She turned slowly, her eyes sweeping the chamber. Then she gestured to the side door. "Bring him in." The words were soft, but the command in them was iron. The chamber doors creaked open, and through them stepped a man in a dark suit, his silver hair damp with sweat, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. Recognition swept the room in an instant. Gasps, whispers, the rustle of reporters lunging forward in their seats. It was Agent Michael Kearns, a veteran of the Secret Service, a man once trusted to guard the life of the president himself, a man who had stood just feet away on that fateful day when the bullet supposedly grazed Trump's ear. The chamber froze, all eyes locked on him. Even Trump stiffened, his rage curdling into something else, something closer to fear. Kearns adjusted his tie with shaking hands. His face was pale, his jaw tight, as though every step toward the witness stand weighed 1,000 pounds. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and took his seat. Jasmine approached slowly, her voice steady, measured. "State your name and your service record." "Michael Kearns," he rasped, his voice low. "United States Secret Service, 22 years, assigned to the Presidential Protective Division." The chamber murmured. Every detail matched. This was no imposter. Jasmine leaned in, her tone sharpening. "Agent Kearns, you were present on the day of the alleged assassination attempt, correct?" "Yes." "You were responsible for perimeter security?" "Yes." The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Then Jasmine asked the question that split the room open. "What were your orders that day?" Kearns swallowed hard. His hands gripped the edges of the table, knuckles white. His eyes darted once toward Trump, red face, seething at the podium, then back to Jasmine. When he finally spoke, his words trembled. We were ordered to create a gap in the security detail." The chamber gasped. "A gap," Jasmine pressed. "Yes," he whispered. "We were told to adjust the formation, to leave a clear line of sight." Reporters scrambled, typing furiously. Senators leaned in, shocked. "And the shooter?" Jasmine's voice cut like glass. Kearns hesitated, his breath ragged. Then he said the words that detonated in the chamber like dynamite. "He was not supposed to kill the president. He was instructed to miss, to graze, to create a wound. One that would make him look like a hero." The chamber exploded, gasps, shouts. Some senators leapt to their feet, demanding order, others shouting accusations. Reporters shouted into cameras, voices cracking with disbelief. The speaker's gavel hammered, but the sound was lost in the storm. Trump stood frozen. His hands gripped the podium, his face flushed crimson, his eyes wide and unblinking. For the first time, he did not roar. He did not sneer. He did not laugh. He simply stood, a man caught under the glare of truth too heavy to deny. Kearns continued, his voice breaking, tears forming in his eyes. "I carried that order with me for a year. It destroyed me. I watched this nation worship him for surviving, a survival scripted from the start." He looked directly at the cameras, his voice trembling but clear. "America, I am sorry. You were lied to." The chamber convulsed with uproar. "Treason!" someone shouted. "Impeach him!" another cried. Social media erupted within seconds. To scripted hero, Chaksha Kearns testifies, to staged assassination trended globally. Across the country, millions sat in shock, mouths open, as the illusion shattered in real time. Trump finally found his voice. "Lies!" he shrieked, pounding the podium with both fists. "He's a disgruntled agent. He's been paid off. This is all a setup." But his words rang hollow, drowned by the roar of disbelief flooding the chamber. Every camera zoomed in, capturing the sweat dripping down his temple, the tremor in his hands, the crack in his once invincible facade. And Jasmine Crockett stood still, unflinching, her eyes burning with vindication. She turned toward Trump, her voice steady, merciless. An assassin who was never meant to kill, a bullet that never existed, a wound painted with blood that was never real. Tell me, Mr. President, how many more lies must America endure before you finally fall? The chamber erupted again, and Trump, cornered, sweating, his fury collapsing into something perilously close to fear, looked smaller than he ever had before. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. She had cut the mask from his face. Now she would peel back the machine that kept it standing. She lifted a stack of charts from her desk, the papers thick with data, numbers printed bold and merciless. "Let us talk about numbers," she said, her voice slicing through the noise like a surgeon's blade. "Because numbers do not lie, Mr. President. People can, power can, but numbers, they tell a story you cannot erase." She spread the charts across the table, and the screens above flickered alive, projecting the figures larger than life. A line graph, approval ratings. The line plunged sharply downward, month after month, scandal after scandal. Then suddenly, a spike, a violent, unnatural surge. "Before the so-called bullet," Jasmine explained, her voice calm but sharp as glass, "your approval was collapsing. 31%, falling daily. Donations drying up. Even your own party whispering of alternatives." The chamber buzzed, murmurs rising like bees. She turned the page. A second graph appeared. A vertical leap, jagged and impossible. But in the 4 days following the stage spectacle, your so-called miracle, you rose to 59%. Donations flooded in. $150 million in less than a week. Enough to resurrect a dying campaign, enough to silence doubters, enough to turn scandal into sainthood. Her words thundered through the chamber, and the images on the screen hammered them home. Trump shook his head violently, sweat dripping down his temples. "Lies, misinterpretations. Those are fake polls," he shouted, his voice breaking. "You twist numbers the way you twist words." But his protests were drowned out by the power of the graphs towering above him. Cold, unflinching, undeniable. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You did not survive a bullet, Mr. President," she said, her eyes locked on him, every syllable steady as stone. "You survived your own scandals. You crawled out of the pit of your failures, not because fate spared you, but because you sold this nation a lie." The chamber gasped. "You lived again, not because of courage, not because of destiny. You lived again because deceit became your lifeline." The words cut deeper than any blade. Reporters typed furiously, their screens glowing. Networks scrambled to replay the graphs, overlaying Jasmine's voice in solemn tones. Across America, televisions glared with the sight of Trump's meteoric spike, the kind of miracle numbers that had once been hailed as divine favor. Now rebranded as evidence of manipulation. In living rooms, jaws clenched. In diners, forks froze midair. In bars, fists slammed against wood. "He lied," a steelworker muttered in Ohio. "He played us like fool," whispered a nurse in Chicago. "He made himself a hero with fake blood," said a retired Marine, shaking his head in disgust. The myth of the bullet was collapsing not just in Congress, but in the hearts of the people. Jasmine pressed harder, her voice gaining momentum, building like a storm. "This chamber remembers. The world remembers. Before that day, you were drowning. You were cornered by scandal, crippled by failure, abandoned by your own allies." She raised a finger, pointing straight at the scar on his ear. "And then, this magic wound, this so-called divine moment that turns shame into strength, weakness into worship. But what was it really? A performance. A lie sold in blood that was never blood, carried by a bullet that never was." The chamber shook with uproar. Shouts collided, disbelief cracked into outrage, outrage into fury. And Trump, fists clenched, face crimson, looked ready to combust. "You call yourself immortal," Jasmine continued, her voice cutting through the din. "But immortality built on lies does not last. America deserves truth, not theater. It deserves justice, not a circus. The screens flashed again. Numbers, graphs, headlines. Each one a blade, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of the myth. This nation was deceived. It was manipulated. It was played. And today we drag that deception into the light. Her final words hit like thunder. You did not almost die from a bullet, Mr. President. You were resurrected by fraud. That is your miracle. The chamber exploded once more, louder than ever before. Some senators shouted for impeachment. Others screamed for order. The speaker's gavel rattled like a drum of war. And Trump, breath ragged, eyes darting, face streaked with sweat, looked smaller than the charts that towered above him, smaller than the truth that closed in from every side. For the first time, the man who built an empire on bravado seemed on the verge of collapse. But then he struck back. He leaned forward over the podium, gripping it so tightly the wood creaked beneath his fingers. His voice, ragged but loud, thundered across the chamber. If I go down, this whole system goes down with me. The words sliced through the uproar. Senators froze mid-shout. Reporters stopped typing. The air shifted, charged, poisoned. Trump's eyes burned with manic fury, his finger stabbing the chamber like a loaded weapon. You think you can erase me? He snarled. You think you can strip me of my power, humiliate me in front of the world? No. If I collapse, I will tear down the walls of this republic brick by brick. I will drag every secret, every weakness, every betrayal into the light. The chamber gasped. I will unleash classified files that would scorch this nation to its core. Names, operations, hidden wars, everything. Do you hear me? I will burn it all. If I fall, America burns with me. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even his allies sat rigid, eyes wide, hands trembling. The threat wasn't bluster anymore. It was a hostage situation. And the hostage was the United States itself. For a heartbeat, the room seemed paralyzed. Was this a president defending himself, or a man threatening to destroy the very country he swore to protect? No one dared to speak. Not the speaker, not the senators, not the security guards who shifted nervously by the doors. The only sound was the echo of Trump's breath, ragged and wild, filling the chamber like the hiss of a snake. Then Jasmine Crockett rose. She stood tall, steady, her eyes cold as winter steel. When she spoke, her voice was calm, not shouting, not trembling, calm enough to slice deeper than any scream. What you just heard, she said, her gaze sweeping the chamber, was not the voice of a leader. It was the voice of a political terrorist. Gas rippled through the room. Trump stiffened, his lips curling back in fury, but Jasmine pressed on, her words relentless. He does not defend this nation. He holds it hostage. He does not love America. He threatens to burn it if it does not bow to him. Her eyes locked on Trump, unwavering. A man who would destroy his own country to save himself is not a president. He is a blackmailer draped in the flag, and America will not be his ransom. The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices were not split down the middle. Even some of Trump's defenders faltered, faces pale, their loyalty shaken, because Jasmine had framed it perfectly. This was not politics anymore. This was extortion. Trump slammed his fists again, roaring, "You can't stop me, I am the system. Without me, you have nothing." But his voice sounded thinner now, frantic, desperate. Jasmine didn't blink. Without you, Mr. President, America still stands. But without America, you are nothing. That is why you scream. That is why you threaten. Because deep down, you know your power was never yours. It was borrowed, and the debt has come due. The chamber went silent, her words hanging heavy, suffocating. Trump's face twisted, his eyes darting wildly as though searching for an escape, a lifeline, a loyalist to save him. None came. Across the nation, Americans sat glued to their screens. In living rooms, whispers spread like wildfire. He just threatened the country. In diners, fists slammed against tables. That's treason, pure treason. In churches, pastors shook their heads. No man of God holds his people hostage. The tide was turning. What once looked like power now looked like desperation. What once looked like strength now looked like blackmail. And Jasmine Crockett was the one forcing the nation to see it. She leaned closer, her voice dropping, colder, sharper. You cannot keep a country hostage, Mr. President. Not this country, not America, not now, not ever. The chamber shook with thunderous uproar. Senators shouted. Journalists screamed questions. The speaker pounded the gavel like a war drum. But through the chaos, one truth cut clear. Trump had revealed himself, not a survivor, not a savior, but a man willing to burn the world to protect his throne. And Jasmine Crockett, standing tall, had named him for what he was. But she was not finished, because words, no matter how sharp, could still be dismissed as rhetoric. Rage could still be brushed off as theater. What Trump could not dismiss, what no tyrant could outrun, was paper. Paper with seals. Paper with signatures. Paper with the force of truth locked behind government vaults. Slowly, deliberately, Jasmine reached down beside her chair and lifted a steel briefcase onto the table. The metallic clack of its weight echoed in the chamber, silencing even the angriest voices. Every head turned. Every camera zoomed in. She spun the locks, one click, then another. The briefcase hissed open. Inside lay a folder stamped in bold red. Classified FBI. Gasps rippled across the chamber like shockwaves. Trump froze. The color drained from his face, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing in sudden recognition. Because he knew exactly what she had. Jasmine slid the folder onto the podium in front of her. She did not rush. She did not grandstand. She moved with the calm precision of someone wielding a loaded weapon. For a year, she began, her voice steady, this nation has been fed a lie. But the truth has not been lost. It has been locked away, sealed, suppressed, buried beneath orders from the very top. Her eyes flicked toward Trump. Tonight, that truth comes into the light. She opened the folder. Page after page of black ink and white paper, official stamps, signatures from senior FBI officials. And in the center, an internal report titled, Operation Hero Stage. The chamber gasped. Reporters nearly toppled over one another to capture the words. Jasmine's voice cut through, clear and merciless. This is the FBI's investigation into what they called the miracle shot. The report was completed, verified, and then sealed, ordered hidden from the public under executive pressure. She lifted the first page high. It details the full staging of the assassination attempt, a plan codenamed Operation Hero Stage, and it lists every element of the performance. The screens above flickered to life, projecting the documents for all to see. Highlighted sections blazed across the marble chamber like neon signs. Synthetic blood packs, applied to right ear. Prop firearm, blanks modified for sound effect. Actor instructed to miss deliberately. Cue given for subject to duck, head tilted for grazing effect. The chamber erupted into chaos. My God, whispered one senator, slumping in his chair. This is treason, cried another, clutching his chest. Reporters screamed into microphones. Networks scrambled to freeze-frame the damning phrases, flashing them across America in real time. And then Jasmine read aloud the most devastating line of all. Purpose: to manufacture public sympathy, elevate approval ratings, and secure campaign donations by portraying the subject as a divinely spared survivor. The chamber exploded. Shouts, gasps, curses, a storm of outrage. But Jasmine stood steady, her voice rising above it all, thunderous, unshaken. He did not survive an assassin. He survived his own failures by turning this nation into his stage. He sold you theater in place of truth. He crowned himself with blood that was never blood, a bullet that was never fired, in a story that was never real. All eyes swung to Trump. His hands shook visibly on the podium. His lips moved, but no words came out. He looked cornered, caught, trapped beneath evidence that no roar could drown. The sweat dripped faster now, streaking down his cheeks, making his scar look smaller, almost fake under the lights. Jasmine turned one final page. It bore a list titled Media Coordination. Networks, anchors, outlets, all pre-briefed, all instructed to frame the event as miraculous survival. The chamber convulsed again, because this wasn't just a hoax, it was a conspiracy. Across the country, America watched in stunned horror. In living rooms, families clutched each other, whispering, "They planned it. They planned everything." In bars, men shouted at the screens, "Fraud! He played us all. In nursing homes, veterans shook their heads in silence, tears welling in eyes that had seen real blood, real bullets. On social media, hashtags ignited like wildfire. Operation, heroes, stage, staged survival. Trump, hoax. Trump finally erupted, his voice hoarse, broken, but filled with fury. Those files are fake, forged, lies, he bellowed. The FBI is corrupt. They've always been against me. But his words rang hollow, drowned by the sight of his own name stamped on page after page of official documents. The cameras zoomed closer, catching the tremor in his lips, the terror in his eyes. And Jasmine Crockett, standing tall, raised the folder one last time. "This," she declared, her voice booming like a verdict, "is the truth America was never meant to see, and today it belongs to the people." The chamber roared. The nation roared. And Donald Trump, pale and trembling, looked not like a president, but like a man caught in the blaze of his own lies. Then his eyes narrowed, his jaw locked tight. The trembling gave way to rage. He leaned forward, teeth bared, fingers stabbing the air toward Jasmine Crockett like a dagger. "You will regret this," he snarled, his voice low but venomous. "You will regret it for the rest of your life." The threat slithered through the chamber, chilling even the loudest voices into uneasy silence. The President of the United States had just threatened a sitting member of Congress on live television. Reporters froze mid-sentence. Senators glanced nervously at one another. The cameras zoomed in close, catching every drop of venom dripping from his words. Trump's eyes locked on Jasmine, blazing with hate. "I will crush you," he hissed. "I will bury you under the weight of my power. You think you can expose me? You think you can shame me? I am bigger than truth. I am bigger than you." His words echoed through the marble hall, heavy, sinister. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward. Each click of her heels against the floor cracked like thunder in the silence. She did not speak to Trump. Not yet. Instead, she turned her face directly toward the cameras, staring into the lens as though staring into the eyes of every American watching. Her voice, when it came, was steady, unwavering, carved from steel. "No, it is not me who will regret this." She took another step, closer to the heart of the storm. "It is America that will regret, for generations, if it allows a man who staged a bullet to rule its destiny." Her words detonated in the chamber like a bomb. The silence cracked open into chaos. Shouts, gasps, the scrape of chairs, the pounding of fists on desks. But Jasmine's words soared above it all, echoing through every speaker, every screen, every living room across the nation. "America will regret it for the rest of its life if it bows to a fraud instead of standing with truth." The cameras cut between her face and Trump's. She was composed, luminous, unshaken. He was crimson, trembling, his lips pulled back in a snarl, sweat dripping down his temples. The contrast was devastating. On one side, control. On the other, collapse. Trump pounded the podium, his voice cracking as he screamed, "She is destroying this country. She is the traitor. Arrest her, silence her, wipe her out." But the more he raged, the smaller he seemed. His voice grew shrill, panicked, almost feral. And Jasmine, her voice calm as the tide, delivered the killing blow. "No, Mr. President. The only traitor here is the man who held his own nation hostage with fake blood and a phantom bullet." The chamber shook. The gallery exploded in gasps and cries. Senators turned pale. Reporters shouted into live feeds, their voices trembling. Across America, viewers leaned closer, hearts pounding, as if they were witnessing history itself being carved in real time. Trump tried again, but his words stumbled. I bled. I survived. He faltered, the words catching in his throat. His voice cracked, breaking under the weight of disbelief pressing down from all sides. Jasmine seized the silence. "You bled stage paint," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "You survived not because of courage, not because of fate, but because you scripted your own martyrdom and sold it as a miracle." The crowd roared, the chamber convulsing with chaos. but her words cut clean through. She stepped even closer, her voice dropping into a calm so cold it sent shivers through the chamber. History is watching, Mr. President. It will not remember you as a survivor. It will not remember you as a savior. It will remember you as the man who faked a bullet and called it destiny. Trump staggered back half a step, his face contorting, his hands clutching the podium as though it might keep him from collapsing entirely. The cameras captured everything, and America saw it. The myth unraveling, the mask falling, the emperor stripped bare. The speaker's gavel slammed again and again, but the sound was drowned by the storm. The chamber had become an arena, and in that arena, Jasmine Crockett had just struck the most devastating blow of all. Her words would not leave the air. They would be replayed, quoted, etched into history books. America will regret it for the rest of its life if it bows to a fraud instead of standing with truth. That line thundered through televisions, echoed in headlines, spread like wildfire across the internet. And as the chamber trembled with uproar, one thing became undeniable. Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman. She was the voice of a nation awakening from its lie. And Donald Trump, red-faced, shaking, shrieking threats, looked less like a president and more like a cornered man watching his empire of deception collapse around him. But the collapse wasn't private. It was live. Across the chamber, cameras rolled mercilessly, their red lights blinking like unblinking eyes. Every twitch of his lips, every beat of sweat, every stumble of his voice was transmitted in real time to tens of millions of Americans. The President of the United States was unraveling on national television, and the whole country was watching. He clutched the podium, knuckles white, trying to steady himself, but his voice betrayed him. I bled. I bled for this nation, he stammered, his words faltering, breaking into gasps. I survived. His throat caught. The sentence died in the air. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Donald Trump had no words, and that silence said more than 1,000 speeches ever could. Jasmine Crockett stood still, watching him with eyes that burned with both fury and certainty. She did not need to speak. Her silence was victory enough. The chamber filled with whispers, gasps, the restless shifting of lawmakers who could feel the tide turning against him. The once unshakable aura of a chosen survivor was crumbling in front of their eyes. Then the outside world answered. On social media, the collapse was instantaneous. Bullet hoax shot to #1 within minutes. Millions of posts flooding timelines with images of the fake blood, the graphs of approval ratings, the leaked FBI files. Alongside it rose another. Derision justice with Jasmine. Clips of her standing firm, calling him the director of a blood-soaked hoax, were replayed, shared, cheered, etched into the digital bloodstream of the nation. The hashtags collided, merged, spread like wildfire. By the end of the hour, they were more than trends. They were a movement. News anchors on every channel dropped their neutral tones. The president is visibly shaken, one said. He is sweating, stammering, unable to provide any defense beyond shouting, "Witch hunt." Another anchor, eyes wide, muttered into her mic, "Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching history. This is the collapse of a myth in real time. In living rooms, in diners, in factories and churches, Americans sat glued to their screens. A retired soldier whispered to his grandson, 'That's not how a hero looks. That's how a liar breaks.' A mother in Kansas turned to her husband, 'She's stronger than him. Can you see it? She's not afraid.' In a bar in Detroit, workers slammed their drinks down and shouted, 'Jasmine, Jasmine, Jasmine,' as if she were already the symbol of justice they had been waiting for. And in Congress, the scene grew darker for Trump. He wiped his forehead with a shaking hand, leaving streaks of sweat across his face. He fumbled with his notes, pages slipping from his grasp and fluttering to the floor. Every stumble, every slip was magnified on the giant screens above him and replayed instantly across the internet. The myth of the bullet, the crown he had worn for a year, lay shattered in pieces at his feet. Jasmine finally spoke, her voice measured, devastating. "This is not the strength of a leader. This is the collapse of a fraud." Her words reverberated through the chamber. They echoed in the hearts of millions watching. Trump tried to respond, but his voice cracked into a hoarse growl. Lies, all lies, don't believe her. Don't. He coughed, choking on his own fury. The microphone caught every desperate gasp. For a moment, the chamber froze again. Then the speaker leaned forward, his gavel trembling in his hand, his voice heavy with shock. Order! Order in this chamber! But order no longer belonged to Congress. It belonged to the people, watching, judging, deciding, and the people had seen enough. By the time the hearing reached its fourth hour, polls conducted live online showed a collapse never seen before. Trump's approval, once spiking on the myth of a miracle, plummeted double digits within minutes. Meanwhile, searches for Jasmine Crockett soared into the millions. The people weren't just watching, they were choosing. As the chamber convulsed with uproar, Trump sagged against the podium, his eyes glassy, his face drawn. And Jasmine stood firm, shoulders squared, her silhouette framed by the blinding lights. One man was unraveling, live before the nation. The other was rising, live before the world. The collapse was no longer just political, it was personal, it was historical. The day America watched its immortal hero reduced to a sweating, stammering fraud, and the day Jasmine Crockett's name became synonymous with justice itself. But history does not pause. It demands a verdict. The speaker rose, his gavel trembling in his grip. The chamber will come to order, he declared, though his own voice shook with the weight of what was about to unfold. On the giant screens above, the roll call began. One by one, senators and representatives cast their votes, not for a bill, not for a budget, but for the soul of the nation itself. I. The sound grew like a drumbeat, steady, relentless. When the final tally appeared, the chamber gasped as one. A supermajority had voted to open a special congressional investigation into President Donald J. Trump. The cameras cut to Trump. His face sagged, lips trembling, his once defiant eyes hollow. No roar left, no smirk, no bravado. He stood alone. Around him, allies shifted away, refusing to meet his gaze. Even those who had once cheered his every word now avoided his trembling shadow. For the first time in his life, Donald Trump looked not like a leader, not even like a fighter. He looked like a man utterly, irreversibly isolated. The chamber erupted, not with chaos this time, but with clarity. Reporters shouted into live feeds, "Congress launches special investigation." Anchors declared history in real time. The president has been abandoned by his own house. On the streets, crowds roared in disbelief and vindication. And above it all, Jasmine Crockett remained still, her hands resting on the podium, her gaze fixed forward, her breathing calm. She had not shouted. She had not trembled. She had simply revealed, and revelation had done the rest. When the session adjourned, she gathered her papers with deliberate care. She did not rush. She did not revel. But outside those heavy doors, history was waiting. The marble steps of Congress were flooded with people. Thousands pressed against barricades, voices rising in chants that shook the night. "Jasmine! Jasmine! Justice! Justice!" The chant rolled like thunder, a living tide of voices that refused to be silenced. Cameras flashed, lights blazed. The crowd surged as she stepped into view. For a moment she paused, staring out at the sea of faces. Black, white, young, old, veterans in worn jackets, mothers holding children, workers still in uniforms. America itself stood before her, and it was chanting her name. She raised her hand, not high, not grand, but steady. The crowd quieted, the silence alive with anticipation. Her voice carried over the steps, low but clear, amplified not by microphones but by conviction. "I did not come here to win applause. I came here to speak truth. And tonight, America has chosen truth over lies." The crowd erupted again, tears streaming down faces, fists lifted high. "He told you he was immortal," she continued, her voice rising. "But immortality built on fraud cannot stand. He told you he was chosen, but a chosen man does not fake his own blood. He told you he was your savior, but a savior does not hold his country hostage." Every word seared into the air like fire. "You deserved better, and now you will have it." Have. Behind her, the Capitol dome gleamed against the August night. Before her, Thousands roared. And across the nation, millions more leaned toward their screens, whispering her words, letting them brand themselves into memory. Justice. With Jasmine dominated every platform, climbing higher, faster, louder than any political slogan in years. Bullet hoax lingered just below, the death knell of a fallen myth. Trump, still inside the chamber, sat slumped in his chair, the roar of the crowd outside piercing through marble and steel. He had once commanded mobs with his voice. Now mobs screamed against him, their voices carrying the truth Jasmine had laid bare. His throne had not been toppled by armies. It had been shattered by evidence, by a bullet that never existed, by a scar that was nothing but stage paint, by a woman who refused to bow. As Jasmine descended the steps, the crowd surged forward, hands reaching, voices breaking, banners waving her name. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning the faces, her heart heavy but resolute. This was not triumph. It was reckoning, the reckoning of August 2025. And when the chants reached their loudest, drowning out even the night itself, Jasmine Crockett whispered words only she could hear. Justice is never given. It is taken back. The cameras caught her silhouette against the lights, her figure sharp against the roaring sea. And the world knew she had done the impossible. She had stripped an empire of lies bare, and she had ended the darkest hoax in modern American history. Truth once buried will always claw its way back to the light. Jasmine's courage proved that even the grandest illusions collapse when a single voice dares to call them by name. The lesson is not only about politics, but about us, about refusing to let fear or deception rule our lives. For justice is not a gift handed down by power. It is a duty carried forward by ordinary people who choose honesty over comfort and courage over silence. If this story unsettled you, don't look away. Sit with it. Question it. Share it. Pass it to someone who still believes lies can rule longer than truth. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where deception is exposed and courage has a voice. Hit the bell, because the next reckoning won't be quiet. It will be louder, sharper, and it might just change the way you see leadership, power, and justice. This is a fictional dramatization, born from real patterns of deceit and real acts of resistance. Any resemblance to actual figures or events is symbolic, a mirror for us all to confront. Thank you for watching. Justice is never staged. It is earned, demanded, and fought for. This is Harrison Story.